Hello everyone, welcome. My name is Daniel, and in this tutorial, I'm going to be getting you started with sculpting in Blender 2.91. I'll be going over the brushes, commonly used brushes that you probably use in every project, in every sculpt that you work on, and also a bit about the settings. Not everything, but I'll brush through the settings for the brushes or settings related to sculpting and some shortcuts that will really come in handy each time you sculpt. And lastly, we'll be going over dynamic topology, what it is, and how you would use it to sculpt models in Blender. So let's get started. Now, the very first thing we're going to do is delete everything in this scene. We do not need the lamp camera or the cube. So just press A, select all X, and delete. Now go Shift A and we'll add our round cube. If you do not see this, if you hold down Shift A, add mesh, and you not see these extra objects, it's because you do not have the add-on enabled. So head to the edit menu, preferences, add-ons, and you scroll down to add curve extra objects. Now this comes shipped with Blender, so you don't need to download anything. Just enable that, and then you have the round cube. And when you add this, it gives you a rounded cube per se, not necessarily a round cube, rounded cube. So you want this a quartz sphere, right? You get this is what we want. So you just tab out and I'll change this matte cap to this one, prefer this one, and we're going to add some geometry to this for the demonstrations that we'll do. So we head to this wrench icon, add modifier, subdivision surface, and we'll use three levels of subdivision. We'll apply that, uh, we'll shade smooth. All right, we're good to go. Now we're going to head to the layout to from the layout to the sculpting workspace. Now all these tabs here are workspaces and they are basically windows that are optimized for what the description that you can see. So if as you can see modeling, it takes you straight into edit mode and you can begin working on the vertices and the edges and the faces and all of that, and you can see the tools here. If you click on texture paint, it takes you to texture paint and you have the UV layouts and the model, the viewport here where you can paint and all of that. So workspaces are that kind of thing, organized windows. So now you head to the sculpting workspace, and these are the brushes over here on the left, and these are the brush settings. And also there are some settings here. What's all that you see here can be seen here. You can see radius, strength. You can get that here as well. So whichever one is easier or more convenient for you, you can use that. And right here in the sculpting workspace, we're going to go over the two important shortcuts before any other thing, and uh let's get into that. So first off, you can see this blue circle over here, which is the area that the brush is going to affect. So if I pick a brush now and I just click and drag out, you can see that's the area of influence, where the brush is affecting. That's the radius of the brush. To increase this to affect uh, a larger portion of the mesh, you just press F and move your pen or your mouse the way you can see, and then you can drag a larger portion. So that's it. Let's go back to sculpt mode. So F to increase the radius of the brush, and you can see it working out there. Then for the strength over here, strength is of course the how strong the brush is. So right now it's at point 0.4. I'll change the brush for a moment. It's at point 0.4. So click, if I hold my pen down, you can see this is what we get at point 4 or point 5 for this clay brush. If I increase the strength all the way up to 1, the effect is much stronger. If I pick another one and this is point 5, if I increase it, this is 1. So you can see the effect is stronger. That's the strength setting. And to change the strength with the shortcut, we use Shift F. So just hold down Shift F and move your pen or your mouse away, and you can increase or reduce the strength. Yes. All right. All right. Now that those two are out of the way, we're going to go to the other settings now. Before anything, I'll change my mat cap to this one. Okay. Now, before anything, before we even go to the settings, these two things, the plus and the minus here, are the directions of the brush. So right now, plus, that means it pushes the mesh out, and negative pushes the mesh inwards. Very easy to understand. And the shortcut for these two, to toggle between them, will be to hold control. Right now it's on negative. If I just left click, that's negative. But if I hold control, it gives me the opposite. If it's on positive, this is just it. If I hold control, it pushes it out. Now that comes very much in handy, because when you get used to this, you hardly, change it from here. You just be holding control whenever you want to. All right, so let's go to the brush settings now. Now these settings affect the look of the brush, how the brush would look. All of them anyway, but this one affects how the brush will look on the mesh. Let me just say so, and I'll take just the auto smooth, and I'll explain it so that we do not get ourselves tied up here. So for the clay brush, with auto smooth set to 0.25, if I make a stroke now, okay, if I make a stroke with auto smooth set to 0.25, you can see how it looks. It applies smoothing to every stroke. If I now set this all the way up to 1, you can see, so it's 100% smoothing, yeah, to every stroke I make. And if I turn this down to 0, so there'll be no smoothing whatsoever, you can see. So comparing this and this is 0.25, that's a quarter, and this is all the way up to 100%, and this is none at all. Now this you want to change depending on what you're working on. I personally do not fiddle with this too much. I most times may not have the need to, but if you want to just know that it is there. And the other settings here, but we won't go over them in this video, so I don't make it too long. The other settings here, masking is another very um important setting that you may want to change depending on what you're working on, but we won't go over that. So let's move to texture. Texture would be if you want to work with an alpha texture, for example. So you come here new, and you have a new texture, then you head over to texture here on the in the properties menu, and you open any texture that you may have, and then you add it, and you can start sculpting with alphas, as I said, for example. And this all these settings will adjust your textures, the mapping, the offset, and the size, and all of that. So this is where you want to come if you want to sculpt with alphas in Blender. Now let's go over the stroke settings. Stroke defines how the brush is going to be applied. If I come to, let's use clay strips, and this is the stroke. By default, it's set to space. I'll increase the strength a bit. By default, most of the brushes are set to space. I think everyone. I'll leave it at most for now. Most of the brushes are set to space, so it's just a series of dots. You click and drag and it makes a stroke. That's how space works. You'd want to change to the uh, others depending on what you want. For example, if you're working with alphas, most of the time, I bet you'd use anchored to to sculpt alphas on your mesh. So if I have an alpha texture here and I use anchored, I click and I can draw it out. I can just drag, click and drag, and I'll make a stroke. Uh, let's use clay. I think let's use clay for that. Okay, so you can see, just click. You've made a stroke already, and you drag it out to expand the influence, expand the area that the brush influences. So that's how Anchor works. So if you had, as I said, if you had the if you had an alpha texture, you just put it over and you click and you move it out. And let's say if this was pores, you have pores or wrinkles or things like that, whatever you have here. Then for something like line, perhaps you're sculpting something that needs some straight lines, something that may be hybrid between hard surface and organic. You use line to get straight lines in your sculpt. No, you wouldn't want to use space and try to approximate and draw it by hand or sculpt it by hand, but just use line and that makes it easy. That makes it easy for you. Another one is drag dot. I do not use this often, but I'll just show you how it works. You can click and you can reposition the dots. So make a stroke, move the dot around. This can come in handy. Everything can come in handy, actually. Everything is useful. Not in every project, but it can certainly come in handy. So it depends. All right. So that's how drag dot works. And I'll encourage you to can go over the other ones, airbrush and dots and curve. I won't go over this. I won't go over everything in this video. And also the other settings here, jitter, if you want some randomized strokes in your brush, you can also do that. Stabilize stroke if you want something smoother with space. Let's say you want to create some kind of uh maybe ornamental designs or calligraphic design, things like that. And yeah, you'd want to use this. Though there may be other methods to achieve this kind of thing, but this is just one way, just stabilize stroke and it just does this. All right. Next one will be fall off. And fall off it defines the strength fall off of the brush. Now, how does that work? I'll just imagine that you're trying to describe a mountain or a hill and someone asks you how steep is it, and you begin to describe it from the top to the bottom. Some things from the top to the bottom, it's very steep. So it's almost like a straight, if it's almost like it forms a 90-degree angle, something like that, and some hills or mountains or things like that. It's the slope is much more gentle. So that's what fall off controls the strength from the center of the brush to the end of the stroke. So where you make the brush, I'll change this to let me change. Okay, let me remove stabilize stroke. So from the center of the brush to the end, how does the brush look? That's what fall off controls. Now I'll change this to draw and change this to anchored, change this to smooth, and I'm going to show you a few fall off examples. All right, so set to smooth, I click and I draw it out. So from the top to the bottom, just a smooth fall off. So this is the top, and then this is where the strength, fades. So, and if I come to sphere, You can see this one, by the time you click and when you're done, it creates a spherical shape. So from the top to the bottom, you can see everything just the setting creates something that looks spherical. And from if I change this to if I change this to constant, the strength will just be uniform for every part of the mesh. So for the smooth and the sphere, for example, every the strength just reduces to the end, but this one, everything just gets the same, you know, the same height above the where it was. So this is how the mesh looks if I set it to constant as it is set now and I just draw it out. You can see it just creates this like tabletop kind of look. Now these are, as I said, everything here, even though I did not touch on them, are important, and you'd want to also experiment and see how they look. And all these can come in handy depending on the kind of creature or character that you are sculpting. So just to let you know. All right, so I'll set it back to smooth now. Now let's head over to cursor. Now this will be if you want to change the color of your cursor. So if you come here and change it to green, it changes to green. If I click the inverse of it as subtract, you can change that as well from blue to maybe yellow something or orange. So that's basically it. And if you don't want to display, if you don't want to have this, you know, this cursor displayed, you can uncheck this. Do I do not see why you want to do this. I don't see why anyone wants to do this anyway. But if you want to do that, that's how you do it. I always want to have this turned on so I see exactly where the brush is, so I'm not guessing anything. All right. And symmetry over here, it mirrors whatever you want to do, whatever you do on one side to the other side. So if I click on X mirror, you know, and it's a huge time saver. This is something that before you sculpt, most you always want to have it turned on, except you're doing a sculpt that is not symmetrical. Perhaps you're sculpting a pose directly. That's when you disable the mirror. So right now it's set to mirror on the x-axis. So whatever I do here, we mirrored here. If I press 3 and go to side view, and I'll turn off symmetry on the x and turn on symmetry on the y. So whatever I do here is going to be mirrored this way. You can see. That's the symmetry option, and as I said, it's a huge time saver. It's just saves us a lot of time. Now that we are done with all um the settings that you want to change, the settings that you want to change from time to time, not everything. We're going to head to the brushes now. I'm going to go over a few brushes that I deem the ones you commonly use, and those will be the grab brush. We'll take that first. The grab, clay strips, clay, the crease, smooth, scrape, pinch, and the draw brush. So let's start with the grab. Now, a good thing with Blender, I guess these names are not so difficult to understand. But anyways, they are quite clear enough. So grab, it it grabs the mesh. That's it. That's the whole story. If I turn on symmetry on the X and I go to side view, I can just grab this. Let's say we're making a face. Let's pretend this we're making a face. Okay. So you just grab the mesh and move it around. That's what grab does. All right. So that's the grab brush. Next one will be the clay strips. Now the clay strips, I will use this to block out the mesh. So if I have this as a head, for example, and I want to begin blocking out the eye sockets, so right now I'm going to hold Control and click and just begin blocking out that region. You can see how rough and unrefined it is, which is what you want when you're starting out, which is what you want when you're sculpting at the first instance. Now, you wouldn't want to go into details, you want to just get those rough shapes down and then move on from there. And the clay strips is just good for that. It's similar to the clay, it's just that uh the fall of it's a bit more rectangular or cubic. Yeah, so you can see that's that's how I use the or that's how I would use the clay strips, to just remove things, and it gives me a very rough work, so I can begin adding details later. So I can just lay the landmarks of the face or whatever I'm sculpting. And the clay, I also use the clay to build forms. I also use the clay to build forms. For example, if I if I'm done with the clay strips, for example, and I want to begin adding those smooth forms, I can then begin using the clay strips. Clay, sorry, the clay brush. All right, I'll undo all these. Undo all these. So that's the clay brush. That's how I use it. But right now it's set to subtract. Uh, that's so things like that. So the clay and the clay strips, you'd use them a lot when you're sculpting, when you're just starting out. Even in the middle and at the ending, you also use them. Next would be the crease. And the crease brush, when you want to create indents, and some kind of ridges, sharpen the cavities of anything you're sculpting, you use the crease brush. It creates that sharp look like this. Oops. Okay, so if I just click and drag, you can see tightens that area and just pushes it down. So in a how do I put this? If when you actually sculpt working on something, something that I usually use it for when I'm sculpting the lips. So if you've watched my time lapse tutorials, you see, when I want to sculpt the lips, I just come and start doing something like this. This is the brush I use. I use the crease brush to create this ridge over here. Now let's go over the scrape brush to okay. If I make some if I push the mesh inwards, let me use the clay strips and just push the mesh inwards, and so I can explain this better. So let's say this is a face. Let's just pretend this is a face, and I just push this out. And let's say you have a character with a well-defined cheekbone, and you've added the volume around that area. I'll use the clay for this. You've added the volume around that area, and you'd want to polish that some more. So let's say you have as I said, a well-defined cheekbone, and you want to just polish that. So you can use the scrape brush to do that. Just hold and drag, and you can see. I won't say it flattens the mesh. I won't say, but for in the organic, if we're talking about organic things, let's just say it flattens things out and gives it that polished look. So script you'd want to use when you're almost done. not it's not necessarily so, but all the time, but most times when you're almost completing your sculpt, you begin scraping and smoothing and pinching things to just making things look good because you've added the details and you've added the first you add your forms, make sure your forms are right, then you add details, and then at the end you begin sharpening everything and polishing everything. That's when you want to use the scrape brush. So this is the scrape brush, and it has an inverse. If you So instead of pushing the mesh downwards, it actually pushes the mesh out. Okay, okay. And the next one, very easy to understand, the smooth brush. So if you have uh, a mesh that says here untidy, for example, we just smoothen it out. It's very easy to understand. Nothing much to it, and you use it in every project. When you're done with the rough work and everything, you begin smoothing things out. As I said, you use it, with with the scrape and the other brushes that you want to use to polish your finished model. And the smooth brush, it has an inverse which enhances details. So if you pick that, it enhances the details. I've used this quite a lot, uh, and it's very good. No, you may not appreciate it because this right here is a very low poly model. But when you have your high poly sculpt and you set this maybe zero point 0.5, and you can begin to enhance the details, and when it's too much you can now come back and smoothen them out. So just have that in mind that the smooth brush also has it didn't have this before, but in the later versions of Blender, it has that, so you can just enhance details or smoothen them out. Okay, the last two will be the pinch and the draw. Let's go to the pinch brush. But before that, let me take us back to the cheekbone example. So, use the clay strips and the clay brush, hold control and push the mesh inwards. So let's say your sculpting is skull. This is not a skull in any way, but let's just pretend again that it is. Let's say you're sculpting a skull, and you want to emphasize the cheekbones, of course, because there'll be no flesh or anything covering it. So you want that to be well defined. Use this scrape and scrape stuff out, scrape stuff out, and just scrape this. Now, if you want to get the a defined look, you can use the pinch brush. Let me add some let me add some volume over here. Yeah. So what the paint brush does is that it pulls the vertices beneath the circle, the radius, you know, as far as the radius can affect, it pulls them together, creating this sharp look. If I use it over here, so it just pulls the mesh together, and it creates this sharp looking uh model. So if let's say you are sculpting this kind of a thing and you want to get your mesh polished out, you want to use the pinch with the scrape, the smooth brush, and all of that. So as I said, it's something that you also use. You want to use when you're tidying up your sculpts, when you're almost done and you want to just begin to sharpen things up. That's when I probably use the pinch brush. So you just use it, and you pull things together like this. I see. It's great. It creates that sharp and polished look. Next one would be the draw brush, sculpt draw. So this one is I'll tell me like a harsher version of the clay brush. And if I want to create maybe nostrils, or and I'm blocking out the ear or even the eye sockets a few times, I can use this, the negative of it. Uh, so if I hold control, you can see. So let's say I had something like a nose, and I want to create the nostrils. I don't know if this will work. Let's see. The geometry I have. Okay. Sorry, these examples are very bizarre. Just hope you get the point. Okay. So I'll zoom out. So if I need to create the nostrils or things like that, I'll probably use the sculpt draw. And also it's since it's harsher than the clay brush, the effect is much more pronounced. I also use it for sometimes for sculpting alphas as well. So when I use the clay and I set it to anchored and maybe it doesn't really get the look I want, I could use the sculpt draw and do the exact same settings, and it just gives me a better look most of the time. So that's the draw brush. Also, in previous versions, I use it to sorry, excuse me, I use it to sculpt veins as well. So you just turn it down and maybe some kind of veins. Or though now in Blender, if I'm not in 2.91, the recent versions, or if I'm not using an alpha or anything like that, I'll use the draw sharp and do that. So I just hold control and I'm going to create a similar effect. So in these versions, I do not use the draw again to do things like veins or some kind of things like that. I just use the draw sharp, which is better for me, in my opinion. All right. So that's about it for the brushes that we're going to touch in this tutorial. That's in no way, or those are in no way the only brushes that you ever use, or the only important brushes. There are a whole lot of other brushes here that are equally very important, like elastic deform, snake hook, multiplane scrape, the cloud brush, the pose brush, draw face sets, and these tools over here, box marks, mesh filter, and cloth filter. Very important tools and brushes, but we won't touch them over in this tutorial. Perhaps in later videos we can go over them. But for the ones that we have touched, you probably use them most of the time. All right. And before we before we round this up, the hotkey is C. You go to and you activate the clay brush. For the crease, the hotkey is Shift C, and you activate the clay strips. Smooth is Shift S, not S. S is to scale. You can see S is to scale, so it's Shift S, and you activate the smooth brush. And the grab brush is G. The grab brush is G, and the pinch brush is P. P. And lastly, the draw brush is X. All right. So those are the hotkeys for the brushes. Now you can set your own hotkeys if you want. Like the for the clay strips, I set it to D. Yeah. Uh, so you can just be careful so you do not override an important shortcut. So you can just right click, assign shortcut, and whatever you pick is what the shortcut to that brush is going to be. That's if the brush doesn't have a shortcut already, or a one that doesn't have one that you can easily you know use, or you just want your preferred shortcut, you can also do that. All right, so now we're going to uh do a little demonstration on dynamic topology. I'll be showing you what it is and how you use it to sculpt. All right, so let's get started with that. I'll press C, go to clay brush. Now, dynamic topology, it allows you to add mesh, to add geometry on the fly. So rather than coming here and using a subdivision surface modifier, you can do that. You can subdivide your mesh and add geometry, so you can add more details right in sculpt mode. You do not need to use the modifier, which just works on everything and multiplies the poly count by 4 for each subdivision level. So now, dynamic topology, you enable it with Control D, or you just come and click it, click this checkbox. So, Control D, uh, it deactivates it, Control D, it activates it again. All right. The first thing that it does is it triangulates your mesh. If I turn on the wireframe display, you can see the whole mesh is triangulated, and there are three settings here that you want to be aware of. Now, basically, the detail size is the higher. Let's just take it this way: the higher you set it to, the uh the less details you add, and the lower you set it to, the more details you can add to your mesh. So if you find that the default is, I think, 12. If you find that 12 is not like I found out that 12 wasn't what I wanted, I reduced it down to 6. If 6 is not, maybe it's too much, can increase it to 8 or 10, but I work with 6. So the have in mind that the lower it is, the more details that you can add. All right. Now the refined method, there are three of them: subdivide edges, collapse edges, and subdivide collapse. Now, subdivide collapse, if I zoom in, if I zoom in and with the clay, I just add geometry, it's subdividing the mesh. You can see these triangles are much smaller than these ones over here, meaning that more detail has been added. And if I zoom out, you know, if I zoom out and I click again, it has collapsed those edges, and it has also reduced the poly count. So right now it's, let's take it again, 49,000. If I zoom in, oh, that's too much. If I zoom in and I just make some strokes, it's at 56,000. If I zoom out and zoom out, click that same area, it's back to 49. So that's how you control the geometry of your model while you're sculpting. So as you zoom in, you add, and as you zoom out, yeah, it collapses the edges. That's how subdivide collapse works. Subdivide edges removes the collapse option. So if you if I zoom in, I'm subdividing. If I zoom in again, I subdivide further. But if I zoom out, no, it doesn't necessarily collapse the ones I've done. If this was set to subdivide collapse and I click, you can see it collapses those edges, but it's set to subdivide edges. So it just keeps on subdividing and subdividing. And the collapse edges, right, you know, collapses these edges. If I zoom out again, it just collapses the edges, doesn't subdivide. So I always leave this to at subdivide collapse. Then when I like where the mesh has gotten to, when I like the look, I now turn it over to subdivide edges and add more detail. But when you're starting out, you'd want to leave it at subdivide collapse so that I can add and remove geometry where you do not You remove where you do not want it and you add where you want it. Now, the detailing method, now, relative detail is what allows me to zoom in. Is back to subdivide collapse. Okay. Is what allows me to zoom in, I subdivide, I zoom out, I collapse. That's the relative detail uh detailing method. Okay. And so it means that it's relative to the distance from the mesh. That's the detail size, the detailing, you can see. Now I'm collapsing all those edges. And now the mesh is just 30,000 triangles. You can see how dense this is. And relative detail, since I'm far away, it's going to be, and instead to subdivide collapse, it's going to be collapsing going to be collapsing the edges. And we are down to 16,000 triangles. Now, if I set this to constant detail, it doesn't, I won't do all these. Let me set it to, if I set it to constant detail, it doesn't matter how far away I am. It's just constantly, the detail is constant. You zooming in or zooming out will make no difference. And that's when you want to also play with the resolution over here to get what you want. Let's increase that. Let's see. So this is what you get with resolution at 8. Let's increase this. So for constant detail, when you increase the detail size, you can add more details. When you reduce it, you know, you add less, or you basically collapse it, should I say. And brush detail depends, you add details based on the radius of the brush. So okay, so if I do this, this is the radius set to 80 pixels, and this is the detail it's adding. If I go out, it collapses it. But now, if I reduce the radius to 30, I'm still at the same, I haven't zoomed in or out. I haven't done anything. So this is what it gave me at 80. I've just changed the radius of the brush to 30, and I'm able to add more details. Now where I am, if I reduce it again, hold F and reduce it to 16, I'm adding more details. So that's the brush detail method. It depends on the radius of the brush. So if it's a huge radius, it adds bigger details. When you reduce it, you can now add finer details. That's how the brush detailing method works. And manual detail, I haven't used this before. So I can't really speak on this. Can't really speak on this. But for the ones that we have touched on, the relative constant and brush, at least now you have an idea on how they work and when you'd want to use them. Typically, I just leave it as it is. You know, uh, and every time maybe I install Blender on a new system or something like that, I just set it to 6 or 8. I set it to 8 before, but I'm now on 6, and I just leave everything as it is. I'm fine with the subdivide collapse and the relative detail. I like being able to control the mesh, you know, having total control over well, not total control, but having more control over the mesh as I sculpt. So I just leave it as it is. And another thing that dynamic topology does, it changes your mesh shading to flat shading. So if you go to object mode now and you change this to smooth shading, and you come back to hold control tab and come back to sculpt mode, As long as dynamic topology is activated, it changes this to flat shading. So if you want to use dynamic topology and smooth shading, just click over here. All right. So that's it for dynamic topology. We add details far away, going in, I'm adding more details. So that's how it works. That's how dynamic topology works. And this is how you could start from your base mesh, your low poly base mesh, and you can just detail it, adding details where you want and removing details where you do not want, which is very very cool. Which is something that even makes it better on low end PC. So you do not need to worry about your mesh being subdivided in everywhere, even where you do not need the vertices. You can just add and remove when you want. So that's how dynamic topology works. And remember, the hotkey is Control D. You deactivate it, and to activate it again is Control D. All right. So I hope this has been helpful. Please leave your comments, your questions in the comment box, and also critiques as well. I want to hear what you think about the video and everything. I want to hear your thoughts on it, and how I can also improve. If you have topics you want me to cover in the future, by the way, I have things that are also coming. So this is just the first of many that will come in the future. So just if you have suggestions or anything you want to say, you can just leave it in the comment box, or you can message me on basically anywhere, Facebook, Twitter, anywhere, and I will be glad to hear from you. So thank you for watching. Please leave a like, subscribe, and share this video to get the word out there. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.